Space isn't just the final frontier, it's the wildest frontier Hollywood ever imagined. For decades, filmmakers mashed up six-shooters with starships, dusty duels with laser beams, and sheriffs with spacesuits. But many of these strange hybrids slipped through the cracks, overshadowed by bigger hits. So, buckle up. Ever wonder what High Noon would look like on the moon? Stick around, because some of these buried gems might just blow your mind. Moon 02, 1969. Picture this. Britain's Hammer Studios, famous for gothic horror, decides to make the first space western. The result? Moon 02. Released just months after the Apollo 11 landing, this film pitched itself as the first space western, complete with greedy prospectors, outlaw miners, and a washed-up astronaut who felt more like a weary gunslinger than a futuristic hero. Set on a privatized moon crawling with shady deals, it swaps horses for lunar buggies and saloons for sterile domes. The story follows Bill Kemp, a pilot-turned-reluctant hero, who gets tangled in a plot involving mining rights, corporate greed, and a woman searching for her lost brother. If that sounds like the plot of a Western shoved into a spacesuit, you're absolutely right. Critics back then weren't kind. Many thought the movie was too campy, too confused about whether it wanted to be serious sci-fi or tongue-in-cheek adventure. But that's exactly what makes it fascinating now. It captured the late 60s cultural weirdness, where space travel felt like a brand new Wild West. Why is it too good to stay buried? Because Moon 02 feels like a missing link, a forgotten experiment that paved the way for later mashups like Outland and Cowboys and Aliens. And the retro-futuristic production design? Pure eye candy for fans of pulp cinema. This film may have been dismissed in its time, but today, it deserves to be remembered as the quirky grandfather of the space western. Battle Beyond the Stars, 1980. Now, let's talk about a cult movie that practically screams space western with every laser blast. Roger Corman's Battle Beyond the Stars took the Magnificent Seven and hurled it across the galaxy. Instead of dusty townsfolk, we get a peaceful planet under threat. Instead of outlaws with six-shooters, we get mercenaries with starships. But the DNA is unmistakably Western. The story follows a young farmer, Shad, who hires a ragtag crew of interstellar warriors to defend his homeworld from the evil Sador. It's a tale of protecting the weak, building alliances, and facing overwhelming odds, straight out of classic frontier storytelling. What makes it unforgettable is the sheer inventiveness. James Cameron, then a nobody, worked behind the scenes on the visual effects and spaceship designs. His fingerprints are all over it, from the imaginative ship interiors to the wild dogfight sequences. Was it low budget? Absolutely. But that's part of its charm. The film leaned into its scrappy vibe, offering big ideas and bold visuals even when the dollars weren't there. The performances, from Richard Thomas to George Peppard, add that cowboy in space flavor that makes you grin. Why is it too good to stay buried? Because it proves you don't need a billion-dollar franchise to tell a rollicking, heartfelt story. This is the kind of movie that made kids in the 80s grab broomsticks, pretend they were blasters, and stage backyard duels on imaginary planets. It deserves a front-row seat in the conversation about forgotten sci-fi frontiers. Outland 1981, Sean Connery as a marshal facing down corporate corruption in a mining colony on Jupiter's moon. Io sound familiar? That's because Outland was essentially High Noon set in space. The parallels are deliberate, and the result is one of the grittiest, most underrated sci-fi westerns of the 80s. Connery plays William O'Neill, a lawman who uncovers a drug smuggling ring that's killing miners. When he decides to stand against the corporation backing it, he finds himself isolated. No deputies, no allies, just one man against assassins sent to silence him. The sense of isolation, the ticking clock, and the mining town setting all mirror frontier justice stories. Only this time, the showdown isn't on dusty Main Street, it's in the claustrophobic tunnels of a moon base. What makes Outland brilliant is its realism. Director Peter Hyams wanted the film to feel like a believable future, where blue-collar workers sweat in harsh conditions, and greed poisons even the farthest outpost. The sets are industrial, dirty, and suffocating. closer to Alien than to glossy sci-fi epics. Critics at the time were divided, some calling it slow, but in hindsight, it's a masterclass in atmosphere. Connery's weary performance grounds the story, and the suspense builds to a nerve-wracking climax. Too good to stay buried? Definitely. Outland is the proof that you can transplant classic Western themes into space without losing any of the tension or grit. If you want a film that feels like frontier justice at the edge of the solar system, this is the one. Galaxina, 1980. Sometimes a movie gets buried because it never knew exactly what it wanted to be. Galaxina is one of those films. It's part parody, part space adventure, and part campy Western. Released at the tail end of the Star Wars boom, it starred former playmate Dorothy Stratton as Galaxina, a robotic law enforcer who slowly becomes more human. The setup is pure Western in disguise. A ragtag crew patrols the galaxy, stumbles into outlaw trouble, and searches for a legendary gemstone. Swap the spaceships for stagecoaches and the aliens for bandits, and you've basically got a Saturday matinee Western. The humor is broad, sometimes clumsy, but it's got moments of genuine charm. Stratton's performance is especially haunting given her tragic fate not long after the film's release. That tragedy partly overshadowed the film, turning it into a time capsule of lost potential. What makes Galaxina fascinating today is its willingness to poke fun at both sci-fi and Western tropes. It was never meant to be a polished blockbuster. It's scrappy, weird, and sometimes flat-out bizarre. But that's what makes it worth digging up. Why is it too good to stay buried? Because it captures a moment when filmmakers were throwing everything at the wall. Cowboy archetypes, futuristic gadgets, and offbeat humor, just to see what stuck. If you want a film that feels like a dusty cult artifact from another dimension, this is it. Space Rage. Breakout on Prison Planet, 1985. With a title like Space Rage, you already know what you're in for. This 1985 oddity takes the classic Western story of a lawman facing down a psychotic outlaw and slaps it onto a penal colony planet. It's pulpy, cheap, and absolutely drenched in B-movie charm. The plot is simple but effective. A sheriff-like figure must track a dangerous criminal who escapes confinement, unleashing chaos across a frontier-style colony. Instead of dusty saloons, we get ramshackle outposts on alien soil. Instead of horses, there are clunky vehicles and desperate settlers trying to carve out a life. The DNA of classic Western shootouts is all there, just dressed up with laser pistols and space helmets. Critics ignored it, audiences missed it, and it quickly vanished into VHS obscurity. But that's a shame, because Space Rage delivers exactly what its title promises: a brash, loud, unapologetically trashy space Western. And in a way, that's its charm. Sometimes cinema isn't about subtlety. It's about giving you a wild ride. Why is it too good to stay buried? Because it's the kind of film that reminds you how flexible the Western archetype is. Whether on the dusty plains of Nevada or a desolate prison world in deep space, the story of law versus chaos never gets old. And if you stumble across a copy of Space Rage, you'll find yourself grinning at just how much fun this forgotten flick can be. The American Astronaut 2001. If you've ever wanted to see a surreal indie western in space, with musical numbers, The American Astronaut is your ticket. Written, directed, and starring Corey McCabe, this black and white oddity doesn't just borrow from westerns, it downright bathes in their aesthetic, only to shoot it into orbit. The story? A space trader named Samuel Curtis drifts from one deal to another across lonely outposts. He's less of a cowboy with a gun and more of a hustler with a knack for survival. Along the way, he encounters strange colonies, eccentric characters, and a rival bent on revenge. Imagine the weirdest dive bar you've ever stumbled into. Now picture it floating in the void of space. That's this movie's energy. What sets The American Astronaut apart is its atmosphere. Shot on a shoestring budget, the film doesn't hide its limitations. Instead, it leans into minimalism, using stark lighting, quirky dialogue, and surreal set pieces to craft something unforgettable. And yes, there are songs, twangy, haunting, and oddly catchy. Why was it buried? Because it never fit Hollywood's mold. It wasn't a blockbuster, nor was it traditional indie drama. It fell into the cracks. too strange for mainstream audiences, and too niche even for cult circles at the time. But in hindsight, that's exactly why it shines. Why is it too good to stay buried? Because it's unlike anything else. This isn't just a space western, it's a fever dream with cowboy boots and cosmic dust. If you want proof that the genre mashup can stretch into the surreal, The American Astronaut is the forgotten masterpiece you need to find. Stingray Sam, 2009. Here's one that doubles down on weirdness, Stingray Sam. Made by the same mind behind The American Astronaut, this film isn't just a movie, it's a 6-part serialized musical. Yes, a musical space western delivered like an old-time movie serial, complete with chapter breaks and catchy tunes. The premise is straight-up pulp fun. Stingray Sam, a convict-turned-reluctant hero, is roped into rescuing a kidnapped girl on a distant planet. Alongside his partner, the Quasar Kid, he journeys across cosmic outposts, battling villains and encountering oddball societies. If that sounds like something ripped from a Saturday matinee serial, good, because that's exactly the vibe it's going for. The charm of Stingray Sam is in its self-awareness, the narration by David Hyde Pierce, no less. Delivers exposition with tongue planted firmly in cheek. The sets are intentionally low budget, but the energy is infectious. Macabe's music, quirky, playful, twangy, keeps the whole thing bouncing along. Why did it get lost? Because it never hit traditional distribution. It played festivals, made a few ripples, then vanished into the world of cult curiosities. Audiences who caught it adored it, but most people never even heard it existed. Why is it too good to stay buried? Because it captures the sheer joy of genre mashups. It's proof you can take the bones of a Western, mix in spacefaring antics, toss in musical numbers, and still land something cohesive and charming. It's not polished, it's fun. And fun, frankly, is priceless. Space Hunter, Adventures in the Forbidden Zone, 1983. This one is a forgotten gem, with a title so pulpy it practically begs you to grab popcorn. Space Hunter, Adventures in the Forbidden Zone was marketed as Mad Max in space, and honestly, that's not far off. The film follows Wolf, a rugged mercenary played by Peter Strauss, who sets off to rescue 3 stranded women from a desolate planet. Along the way, he teams up with a scrappy orphan, played by a young Molly Ringwald, pre-Breakfast Club fame, and faces off against an evil overlord named Overdog. Yes, Overdog. Only in the 80s could you get away with a villain like that. The Western DNA is clear. Wolf is a gunslinger-type loner, navigating hostile terrain, fending off raiders, and reluctantly taking responsibility for those weaker than him. Replace spaceships with horses and Overdog's mutant army with outlaw gangs, and you've basically got a frontier rescue story. Why did it vanish? Timing. Released just after Return of the Jedi, it never stood a chance against the Star Wars juggernaut. Audiences overlooked it, and critics dismissed it as derivative. But here's the thing. Derivative doesn't always mean bad. In fact, sometimes it's pure pulp gold. Why is it too good to stay buried? Because it's a time capsule of 80s sci-fi excess. The practical effects, the over-the-top villain, and Molly Ringwald's spunky performance give it charm in spades. It's not prestige cinema, it's scrappy fun. And if you want a true cowboy rides into town to face the bad guy's story in space, Space Hunter delivers. Metalstorm, The Destruction of Jared Sin, 1983. If Space Hunter was a space western on a dusty frontier, Metalstorm cranked up the grit. Marketed as Mad Max meets Star Wars, this 1983 film leaned into 3D gimmicks, desert settings, and a plot that feels ripped from a pulp magazine. The story follows Dogan, a lone lawman hunting down the evil warlord Jared Sin. Along the way, he faces mutant raiders, bizarre landscapes, and a showdown that feels straight out of a spaghetti western. The film's tagline, "It's high noon at the end of the universe," pretty much says it all. Critics hated it. They called it cheap, clunky, and incoherent. But here's the thing. They missed the point. Metalstorm wasn't trying to be high art. It was trying to be spectacle. The 3D gimmick was a big draw in theaters, and the desert landscapes gave it an otherworldly feel. At its heart, it's a Western gunslinger tale, just dressed in sci-fi trappings. Why was it buried? Like many 80s space adventures, it got crushed under bigger budget blockbusters. Plus, the 3D fad faded almost overnight. The film was left stranded, remembered only by die-hard VHS collectors. Why is it too good to stay buried? Because it's unapologetically pulpy. Sometimes you don't want polish, you want grit, lasers, and a showdown between good and evil on a barren wasteland. Metalstorm may be flawed, but it's got soul, and that makes it a true hidden treasure of the space western canon. Prospect 2018. Let's fast forward to something more recent but no less forgotten. Prospect. This indie film from 2018 flew under the radar, but it's one of the most authentic space westerns ever made. The premise is simple but gripping. A teenage girl and her father land on a hostile alien moon, hoping to strike it rich by harvesting precious gems. Things go sideways fast when they encounter rival prospectors, betrayals, and shifting alliances. Sound familiar? That's because it's the classic gold. Rush narrative, just transplanted into outer space. The film's strength lies in its atmosphere. Instead of glossy spaceships, everything feels grimy, used, and practical. Closer to mining camps than high-tech labs. The forested moon feels both alien and frontier-like, a hostile wilderness that could eat you alive at any moment. Pedro Pascal, before he became everyone's favorite space dad in The Mandalorian, delivers a standout performance as a morally gray drifter. His presence adds weight to the story, making it feel even more Western. Why was it buried? Simple. Indie distribution. It never had the marketing push to reach wide audiences, and it got overshadowed by bigger sci-fi releases that year. Why is it too good to stay buried? Because it shows how powerful the space western formula still is. Strip away the gloss, focus on survival, greed, and human tension, and you've got something timeless. Prospect isn't just good, it's proof that the frontier spirit still belongs in the stars. John Carter, 2012. Yes, Disney's John Carter was a box office flop. But don't let that fool you. Beneath the bloated marketing disaster lies one of the most authentic space westerns of modern cinema. Based on Edgar Rice Burroughs' early 20th century pulp stories, it's a tale of an ex-Confederate soldier mysteriously transported to Mars, where he becomes a reluctant hero in a war between alien tribes. Strip away the Martian trappings, and what do you have? A classic drifter story. John Carter is the gunslinger who doesn't want to fight anymore, drawn into a conflict that forces him to rediscover his purpose. The dusty Martian plains, the political feuds, the damsel in distress rescue missions, these are all Western beats dressed up in the red sand and alien costumes. Why did it flop? Mismanagement? Disney didn't know how to sell it, changing the title from John Carter of Mars, and marketing it like a generic action epic instead of leaning into its pulp roots. Critics weren't kind, and the movie got buried under its reputation as one of Hollywood's most expensive bombs. Why is it too good to stay buried? Because it's visually stunning and narratively faithful to the very stories that influenced decades of westerns and sci-fi alike. If you watch it without the baggage of its failure, John Carter plays like a space western epic with real heart. It may have been lost in the noise, but it deserves a second look from anyone who loves frontier storytelling under alien suns. Cowboys and Aliens, 2011. On paper, this one should have been unstoppable. Jon Favreau directing, Harrison Ford, and Daniel Craig starring, and a concept so simple it's genius: Cowboys versus Aliens. Released in 2011, Cowboys and Aliens fused the grit of the Old West with the high-tech menace of extraterrestrial invaders. The setup? A mysterious outlaw with a strange alien device strapped to his wrist reluctantly leads a small town against a looming alien threat. The Western beats are textbook. A stranger rides into town. Distrust simmers between the sheriff, the outlaws, and the townsfolk. Then a bigger, deadlier force threatens them all, forcing uneasy alliances. Replace the aliens with bandits and the device with a stolen revolver, and you've got a classic Western showdown. So, why did it get forgotten? Expectations. With that cast and budget, audiences expected a genre-defining masterpiece. Instead, they got a flawed but entertaining hybrid. Critics were harsh, claiming it didn't fully commit to either genre. Audiences moved on quickly, and the film was left in the dust. But here's the truth. Cowboys and Aliens is fun. It leans into pulp energy. It has great performances. Craig is the perfect space gunslinger type. And the mashup works better than most people admit. Its biggest sin was not being the blockbuster it promised to be. Why is it too good to stay buried? Because it's one of the rare modern attempts to fully embrace the space western concept on a blockbuster scale. If you missed it, you owe yourself a rewatch. It's not perfect, but it's pure popcorn frontier fun. BraveStarr, the movie, 1988. Most people remember Saturday morning cartoons, but fewer remember that BraveStarr got its own theatrical movie. Released in 1988, BraveStarr. The movie was based on the Filmation animated series about Marshal BraveStarr, a Native American lawman keeping order on the distant planet of New Texas. Yes, New Texas. It doesn't get more space western than that. The movie sets up BraveStarr's origin story, showing how he gains his mystical powers and takes on the outlaw Tex Hex. The setting is straight-up frontier fiction, only with laser pistols, alien cattle, and prairie towns with rockets instead of horses. The themes, law versus chaos, good versus evil, community versus greed, are all pure Western storytelling, just animated and projected into the cosmos. Why was it buried? Timing. By 1988, Filmation was collapsing, and the show's toy line had already flopped. The movie barely got a release and was quickly forgotten. It never had the chance to grow into the cult classic it could have been. Why is it too good to stay buried? Because it's one of the most unapologetically space western things ever made. Unlike others that tried to disguise their western roots, BraveStarr embraced them. It's campy, sure, but it's also heartfelt, imaginative, and uniquely bold. For fans of genre mashups, this animated gem deserves way more love than it ever got. Ghosts of Mars, 2001. John Carpenter knew a thing or two about westerns disguised as other genres. His 2001 film, Ghosts of Mars, might look like a sci-fi horror on the surface. But peel it back and it's basically a Western siege movie. Think Rio Bravo on Mars. The setup is simple. A police officer, Natasha Henstridge, is sent to transport a dangerous prisoner Ice Cube from a Martian mining outpost. But the outpost is overrun by hostile, ghost-possessed colonists. The lawmen and the outlaw are forced into an uneasy alliance to survive wave after wave of attacks. Sound familiar? That's because Carpenter loved transplanting Western frameworks into other settings. He did it with Assault on Precinct 13, a modern urban Western, and repeated the trick here in space. The barren Martian landscapes even look like desert backdrops, only with a crimson filter. Why was it buried? Bad timing and worse reviews. Released in the early 2000s, audiences weren't ready for its pulpy blend of action, horror, and Western tropes. Critics called it messy, and it quickly tanked at the box office. Why is it too good to stay buried? Because it's pure Carpenter doing what he does best, stripping stories down to primal conflicts and letting atmosphere do the heavy lifting. It may not be his masterpiece, but it's an underrated gem that deserves to be revisited, especially if you love the Western DNA hidden beneath its Martian horror trappings. Oblivion, 1994. Before Tom Cruise headlined a blockbuster with the same name, there was Oblivion, a 1994 direct-to-video space western that went all in on the mashup. This one doesn't pretend to be anything else. It's a western with aliens, plain and simple. Set in the town of Oblivion on a distant planet, the story follows a frontier sheriff, a gunslinging alien outlaw named Red Eye, and a collection of quirky settlers trying to survive in a hostile world. The saloon doors swing open, the duels are high noon, and the archetypes, sheriff, outlaw, gambler, townsfolk, are lifted straight from classic westerns. Only here, the sky is green and the whiskey glows. The film never hit theaters, instead landing directly on VHS. Critics ignored it, but sci-fi fans who stumbled across it in video rental stores discovered a goofy, colorful, oddly charming adventure. It even spawned a sequel, Oblivion 2, Backlash, cementing its place as a mini-cult series. Why was it buried? The mid-90s direct-to-video market was saturated with low-budget fare, and Oblivion didn't have the star power to stand out. It slipped into obscurity almost instantly. Why is it too good to stay buried? Because it embraces the space western concept with zero hesitation. It doesn't wink, it doesn't hold back. It just dives headfirst into a world where cowboys and aliens are neighbors, and the frontier spirit never dies. Campy? Absolutely. Forgettable? Not if you give it another chance. From lunar prospectors to Martian marshals, these forgotten space westerns prove the frontier spirit never really died. It just moved into orbit. Sure, some of them were clunky, campy, or crushed at the box office, but each carried the same DNA: lawmen, outlaws, and dusty showdowns under strange skies. Which of these buried gems surprised you most? Drop your pick below, hit subscribe, and let's keep riding this cosmic frontier together.